Two scenarios for ending the Russian-Ukrainian war according to Donald Trump, Putin's reaction, and the reasons for bombing Kyiv. Let's discuss right now. My name is Iryna Uzlova, with us Serhiy Zhirnov, a member of Russian State Security Service and Foreign Intelligence Service. Serhiy, hello, glad to see you. Hello, Iryna, nice to see you too. Hello to the audience. Thank you for taking the time. Bloomberg reports that we're talking about two options that Putin probably won't like. Trump has figured out how to end the war with sanctions. Bloomberg writes about two U.S. scenarios: easing sanctions to benefit Russian oil companies or strengthening them to put pressure on Russia. Bloomberg's first scenario is possible if the U.S. sees an agreement to end the conflict coming close. This could include raising the oil price ceiling above $60 a barrel. If the war cannot be stopped diplomatically, the second scenario will be applied, including tanks and the illegal Russian fleet. What would have to happen for Putin to agree to a diplomatic end to the war that he adamantly does not want? And would the second scenario really work in short order? The Bloomberg agency is publishing information again, to which my reaction is simple: they just needed something to write about. We've described both the worst case and the best case scenario. It's basically about nothing, especially in the context of waiting for Trump's inauguration. There are no scenarios. No one knows how Trump will act, how his cabinet appointments and congressional confirmation will go. Bloomberg needs to write something, so they use the subjunctive mood: if, then so, and if otherwise, then not. I could write 25,000 scripts, but of course, we won't make it in time. Although they are ghostly, some of them are probable. All of them are likely, as is the fact that Trump will either be inaugurated or die. Putin will either continue the war or stop the war. This is a conversation about nothing. The positive scenario is bad because it implies that sanctions will be lifted if Putin shows goodwill. That's not right. First, he should sign the agreements, and then we can talk about lifting sanctions. If sanctions are lifted for good words, Putin will quickly take them back, because his words mean nothing. Ukraine should not believe either his words or the signed documents, given the treatment of the Budapest Memorandum. As the United States treated the Budapest Memorandum. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an interview with Polish media that Putin is actually afraid of the United States. He fears China and Europe, and Trump can influence Russia. Is Putin more afraid of Europe and the U.S., or hopeful of China? And then we'll talk about whether Trump can pressure Putin. There is an information war going on, not just a war on the battlefield. And that's why I think this Zelensky interview is more ipso, which is designed for the West, but doesn't so much reflect 100% reality as I see it. I think Putin is in an information bubble and doesn't look like someone who is afraid of anyone. My impression is that he is not fully informed about what is going on in Russia. He is told that everything is great. There are temporary difficulties, but they are solvable. And on the battlefield, everything is great, because they are constantly capturing new territories. I don't get the impression that he's afraid of anyone, including Trump. It seems to me that Putin will manipulate Trump in the negotiations better than the other way around. What tools or blackmail techniques is Putin using to manipulate Trump? Putin, despite a failed career in intelligence, was still an intelligence man. He was a KGB man who was trained to manipulate people. Putin knows how to manipulate people. And over the last 25 years, he has managed to manipulate the Western world. Watch, for example, Biden's latest speech and summation. He said he was able to prevent a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. Biden actually admitted that he fell for Putin's manipulation and nuclear blackmail. Putin's manipulation has been successful, including meetings with Trump, such as the press conference in Finland, where Trump said he believed Putin more than his own intelligence agencies. And that was proof that Putin was manipulating him. Trump is easily manipulated, as shown by the example of Jay Vance, who became VP under Trump and will be sworn in a few days. There's just a little bit of waiting left to do. Vance is a prime example of how Trump can be manipulated. The man who called Trump an idiot and a freak, claiming he would never be a Trumpist because his statements are idiotic and criminal. He then changes his position 180 degrees and ends up on Trump's team, becoming his vice president. The vice president is the person who becomes the president of United States if Trump dies, no election. There, you see how easily Trump can be manipulated. Putin, as a former senior KGB officer, is well versed in this. J.D. Vance compared Trump to Hitler, and then the power shifted. Scary if Musk knows how to manipulate and has a lot of influence over him. I liked Michael Scheitelman's take. Trump has never talked about Greenland, Canada, or the Panama Canal, except in the last 2 to 3 weeks.
Трамп никогда не говорил ничего ни о Гренландии, ни о Канаде, ни о Панамском канале, ничего, кроме как вот за последние 2-3 недели, да?
It turns out that the last 3 weeks he's been affected by someone the most. Who's in his inner circle? Elon Musk, who has settled in Malaga and is now being told he will have an office next to the White House. The Greenland and Canada story seems to be an outside influence, because if it was Trump's belief, he would have said so repeatedly. He suddenly pulled out a new topic like the devil out of a snuff box. Looks like there's someone in Trump's entourage who put this in his ear. We assume it's Musk or someone else in Trump's entourage. The Moscow Times' sources say Trump's statements about Greenland, Panama, Canada, and the Gulf of Mexico embolden the Kremlin, showing that new rules in the world are possible despite international charters.
Кстати говоря, Сергей, источники издания The Moscow Times писали накануне, что вот эти все заявления и действия Трампа около Гренландии, Панамы, Канады, Мексиканского залива, они на самом деле очень приободряюще и приободряюще действуют на верхушку Кремля. Там говорят, ну вот, если он тоже показывает, что есть новые правила в мире возможны и практически никакие международные уставы не берет во внимание.
This can be used in negotiations by saying, you see Greenland and Canada as protecting national interests. We invaded Ukraine to protect our national interests. On first examination, the topic as Trump has presented it is pure Putinism in action. Putin manipulated Trump by showing him that you can take over any territory and neighbors with force. Trump, when asked about solving the problems, did not rule out the use of force. If he had said he would just buy everything, it could be understood. After all, America has acquired land many times before. Recall that Louisiana was bought by the U.S. from France, and another southern state was bought by the UK. Plus, the Russian Federation has Alaska. So, buying land is not something out of the ordinary. That he didn't rule out the use of force is pure Putinism. When he voiced it, it's a gift to Putin, because everyone hopes that Trump, a strong president, will start negotiating with him and read Putin's morals.
И выйдет на переговоры, например, с Путиным и начнет ему читать мораль, говорить, что Вова, ай-яй-яй, нехорошо вообще захватывать соседнюю страну, какой ты негодяй, какой ты плохой.
If Trump says it, what will Vova say to him? Putin can say, you were talking about Greenland, and now you are dripping on my brains. I didn't seize anything. We came at the request of Russian speakers, we held referendums, and everyone wanted to join us.
В Украине. Больше того, он же ведь это все умеет подать, то есть он скажет, я ничего не захватывал, мы просто пришли по просьбе, так сказать, русскоязычного населения Украины, потом мы там провели референдумы, они все захотели к нам присоединиться.
Just like you're talking about a referendum in Greenland, where they might want to join the U.S. Trump gave Putin bargaining chips and weakened his position.
Этих потенциальных переговоров и значительно серьезно ослабил свои позиции силы.
Trump no longer has a position of strength in negotiations. We hope that his team will use other sanctions trump cards against Russia.
Да, конечно, очень жаль, что такое происходит, но будем надеяться, что другие, возможно, санкционные козыри будут извлечены командой Трампа для того, чтобы бить эти, как будто бы, как думают джокеры Российской Федерации.
Statements by Lavrov, Ryabkov, Peskov, and others that Russia needs security guarantees in the Eurasian space have been heard throughout this week and in recent years. Ukraine, Lavrov said, will stay, though Patrushev, who is at the end of his career, believes it will not, while continuing to shield foreign tobacco companies in Russia.
Но, тем не менее, еще чем-то руководит, кроме того, что крышует иностранные табачные компании в России, как оказалось.
The Kremlin doesn't need negotiations, given Putin's distorted reality, which is where we started. For Putin, Patrushev, and Lavrov, negotiations are not necessary. He doesn't need to negotiate for an agreement. He needs talks with Trump to raise his profile and show that the leader of a major country is willing to dialogue with him. That's what he needs negotiations for. This is similar to the Trump and Kim story. When Trump began talks with the DPRK, it was pitched as a significant breakthrough.
Начать переговоры напрямую с Северной Кореей, то это, так сказать, подавали, как, видите, какой замечательный прорыв.
He could argue with Kim Jong-un and then take him to the negotiating table.
А потом может просто взять и выйти с инициативой, сесть с ним за один стол переговоров.
Based on the results of the talks, Trump accomplished nothing, and Kim Jong-un sacrificed nothing. He elevated his status by meeting directly with the President of the United States. He showed the voters that an important person was coming to him and he was operating under his rules. Kim Jong-un has shown this, and Putin also needs to negotiate just for that. Putin says he's not going to sit down at the negotiating table with Zelensky. I don't consider him a legitimate leader. And the only one I can sit down with is Trump. I don't want to sit at the negotiating table with Europe, not Macron, not Scholz, not anyone. Other than Trump, I don't have any other negotiators. By the time he sits down at the table with Trump, Trump will have already lost the negotiation. He's not allowed to come to the negotiating table. Trump should be the umpire facilitating the talks between Zelensky and Putin, overseeing them and making sure things are normal. If he sits down at the table with the aggressor, it's like Roosevelt sitting down to negotiate with Hitler in 1943. The countries of the anti-Hitler coalition were not going to sit down at the table with Hitler. Neither Stalin, Roosevelt, nor Churchill sat down at the table with Hitler. The bottom line for Putin is that if he puts Trump at the table, he's already won. Trump has already lost, and he doesn't seem to realize it. On October 4, 2022, Zelensky approved the decree of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine that negotiations with Putin were impossible. This was stated by Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga. The decree was a response to Putin's illegal inclusion of 4 regions of Ukraine in his constitution. Crimea was illegally annexed in 2014. Sergei, how can all this be happening? Yermak stated that a meeting between Zelensky and Trump was being prepared. We hope that the first conversation will be with Trump, and then Trump will meet with Putin. But we don't know what will happen first. If diplomacy succeeds, representatives will come together. How is this possible if the negotiations are to be in an extended format and not between the two parties? The first to sit down at the negotiating table with Putin will probably be Zelensky. We hope it's him, as Trump was congratulated by dozens of leaders after winning the election.
То есть, вот, грубо говоря, если первым человеком, с которым Трамп будет встречаться, будет президент Зеленский, а мы надеемся на это, что это будет президент Зеленский, потому что, я вам напомню, когда была история, значит, 5 ноября, и Трамп формально, значит, он прошел выборы, и когда было уже понятно, что он будет следующим президентом Соединенных Штатов Америки, его поздравило там несколько десятков государственных лидеров.
When Fox or the Trump administration released a report on the congratulations, President Zelensky was among the 7. The main leaders who congratulated Trump, with whom it makes sense to maintain relations with the U.S. If Trump meets with Zelensky first and then Putin, that's not so bad. It's still bad, but not as bad. If he starts by meeting with Putin, it will be a failure. Sergei, we've covered the scenario. Let's move on. Several foreign guests arrived today. Putin launched a shaheda through the center of Kyiv, where Zelensky was meeting with Britain's Prime Minister and Italy's Defense Minister.
премьер-министром Британии Киром Стармером, также министр обороны Италии был сегодня у нас.
We signed a 100-year agreement with Britain on cooperation in various spheres, received a new aid package, and discussed the possibility of introducing peacekeepers, including after the freezing of the conflict.
Новый пакет помощи получили от Британии, так еще и, возможно, как писало, по крайней мере, издание The Guardian, обсуждался и вопрос ведения миротворцев в том или ином формате, я так понимаю, возможно, и в послевоенный период или в период после заморозки войны, если таковой тоже, конечно, возможно случится.
Starmer discussed the issue with Macron, who was one of the first initiators of the idea back in February last year. What is known about the discussion of this issue in France's top leadership, both behind closed doors and in public discussions? You've asked a lot of questions. Let's try to sort it out in order.
Ну, вы мне задали здесь очень много вопросов, поэтому попытаемся разобраться. Много вопросов в одно.
Let's deal with the visits first.
Это, конечно, очень важно.
The UK has promised to hand over at least £3.5 billion, euros or dollars annually, to Ukraine. In any case, the amount is significant.
Не меньше 3,5 миллиардов чего-то там, я вот не знаю, чего там, этих ее фунтов или евро, или долларов. Вот, ну, без разницы. Цифра все равно большая помощи для Украины.
The UK will also hand over another $3 billion from frozen Russian assets.
Так сказать, замороженных активов или там результатов, как бы доходов от замороженных российских активов.
This is important because Ukraine receives support from countries such as Denmark and Norway, which promise to allocate serious sums, such as $1.52 billion annually.
Которые тоже говорили о достаточно серьезных цифрах, там разговор шел о 2 миллиардах, 1,5 миллиарда каждый год, которые эти страны собираются выделять Украине.
The 54-nation coalition will continue to help Ukraine even if the U.S. revises its aid policy.
Соединенные Штаты Америки начинают, например, пересматривать свою политику помощи Украине, все равно это не означает, что эта помощь остановится.
1/3 of U.S. aid is meaningful, and it could end. Ukraine produces 1/3 of the weapons, with Europe supplying another 40%. Ukraine will be able to continue to resist aggression even if U.S. aid stops completely, although it will be more difficult.
Продолжать противостоять российской агрессии даже при полной остановке помощи со стороны Соединенных Штатов Америки.
This visit is important, but there is also a definite problem. Trump is a man with pronounced enemies for whom anything Biden does is bad.
У которого есть, так сказать, как бы враги такие, красные тряпки, и вот все, что делал Байден, для него это плохо.
Everything Biden has done good for Ukraine, Trump considers bad. Elon Musk criticized Cyrus Starmer, calling him an idiot and suggesting a new election in the UK. While it's none of his business, Trump might not appoint him as a geopolitical advisor, but to work on domestic issues.
Заниматься такими вопросами, тем более, что Трамп собирается его назначить совсем не советником по геополитике, а вовсе наоборот даже заниматься внутренним переустройством какой-то там государственной машины.
Musk is meddling in the affairs of the UK, Germany, and other countries, minding his own business. Musk has already voiced his opinion, and a centennial agreement is being signed in Kyiv between Ukraine and the UK, with Keir Starmer in attendance. It's a red rag for Musk and Trump. It's important for Ukraine, but by signing the document, it kind of contradicts statements by Musk, who has criticized Cyrus Starmer.
Но, с другой стороны, получается, что Украина, подписав этот документ, пошла как бы, ну, по крайней мере, против заявлений Маска, который третировал до этого Кира Стармера.
This could make it difficult to communicate with the new Trump administration. Hopefully, Musk was just giving his opinion, since he's not a geopolitical advisor. Trump apparently has no intention of making Musk an advisor. There's no telling what they're talking about while sitting at Mar-a-Lago, drinking cocktails or Coca-Cola. And so we don't know how it's going to end. The politics are complex, intersect with U.S. domestic affairs, and involve personalities like Musk and Trump.
С внутренней аджендой Соединенных Штатов Америки и, опять же, с такими странными, сложными, психиатрически больными личностями, как Маск и Трамп.
Musk isn't a geopolitical advisor, but he seems to think he is. We think so. It's not officially confirmed, but he's already speaking out saying, "You're not poor, you're fair." They say, "Musk, if you're meddling in our affairs again, we're already worried because he's already meddled in the affairs of Britain, Germany, and other countries." If the new U.S. administration had been more definite in its language on ending the war, perhaps we wouldn't have had to sign such documents before the inauguration. There was also a visit from German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. Zelensky traveled to Poland. This shows that Europe is preparing to be autonomous if Trump leaves us without help. This marks a significant diplomatic achievement for Ukraine, as Europe shows its willingness for autonomy ahead of Trump's inauguration. Plus, Zelensky recently met with Melania in Italy.
Несколько раз, плюс еще я вам добавлю, что вспомним, что Зеленский ездил еще и в Италию и встречался с Мелони.
Europe continues to support Ukraine.
Европа стоит за Украиной и продолжает стоять.
The answer to your question is that Macron and Starmer are discussing the possibility of sending French or British troops to enforce the ceasefire when it is reached.
Какое-то взаимодействие с тем же самым Стармером о том, чтобы в случае необходимости, после того, когда будет достигнут какое-то, по крайней мере, соглашение о прекращении огня, возможно, послать французские или британские войска для того, чтобы, значит, они встали на линии разграничения между воюющими сторонами и обеспечивали соблюдение этого соглашения.
By the way, France is preparing for the worst. Recently, there was information that in November last year, as it became known only now, France held an exercise at the level of the Ministry of Defense, which involved about 3,500 people, that is, an entire brigade. As part of the exercise, a scenario of Russian Federation interference in a NATO country or a ceasefire violation was played out. Specifically, a situation involving a river similar to a bend in the Dnieper River was simulated. And the French practiced actions in Ukraine, including possible countermeasures against Russian troops crossing the river.
Потому что там даже, говорят, в общем, имитировалась какая-то на местности река, которая похожа на излучину Днепра, и то есть вот по какой-то территории украинской, значит, вот исходили даже из того, что вот французы стоят, а если вдруг русские начнут чего-то там переправляться через эту реку, то как на это реагировать и как их там отбивать, не отбивать и так далее.
France and the UK are seriously preparing for such issues, but there is no exact data as negotiations continue. This is preparation for the future. The French and British have noted that intervention is only possible with an armistice or ceasefire agreement. Sergei, how is the idea of a peacekeeping force perceived now under these circumstances? I can't say exactly how this is being reacted to, because in France we are busy with our domestic affairs at the moment. The conditional acceptance of the new government recently took place, and this week the second prime minister, who was appointed after the early elections last July, gave a big speech in Parliament about government policy. Right now, the focus in France is on domestic issues, rather than Ukraine, plus discussions about the Middle East and Trump's inauguration.
выступал в парламенте с большой речью о политике своего правительства, и поэтому мы сейчас заняты расследованием собственного пупка во Франции, а совсем не вопросов Украины, плюс вот вопросы Ближнего Востока, вопросы инаугурации Трампа.
Now, Ukraine is somewhere in the 4th or 5th place in the news, if it is mentioned at all. When Francois Biden spoke, international topics were not touched upon at all, and we are just minding our own business. But in principle, 4th or 5th place is not bad either, much better than 45th place. Domestic issues are important because they affect foreign policy and are related to people's right to choose and its consequences. Russia will get a response for the attack in the center of Kyiv, near the Mariinsky Palace, where Zelensky and Starmer met. As Starmer said, we will also say hello to the Russian Federation. This shows that Putin is afraid or trying to demonstrate the presence of drones. Doesn't anyone know, or doesn't anyone have drones? I don't think he's particularly concerned about how his attacks are perceived abroad. I have a feeling that Putin is not afraid of anyone, not even Trump, because he has his own formed vision of the world. He's just following his vision of the world. Every such foray will, of course, be criticized. Let me remind you that even at the beginning of the war, he did not hesitate to bomb Kyiv when the UN Secretary General, known for his loyalty to Putin, was there. He was reminded that a Russian missile could fall on his head. The feeling is that there will be changes after the 20th, and this year may be the year of a change in the vector of the Russian-Ukrainian war, at least in diplomatic and geopolitical terms. I agree with you on the change of vector, but it will not necessarily be positive for Ukraine. Risks remain, as we have already discussed. The armed forces of Ukraine guarantee the protection of our interests. Sergey, thanks for the conversation, interesting thoughts, and your time. See you later. Have a good day. Thank you. Serhiy Zhirnov, ex-KGB officer. Thank you for being with us. Subscribe to Sergey's YouTube and YouTube 24, links in the description. Take care. Have faith in the armed forces.